So thank you everyone today for attending my talk about culinary diplomacy. I appreciate Sacramento Friendship Force for inviting me, and we'll go ahead and get started. So a little bit more about myself. I am a program manager for food-specific and agricultural nonprofits and companies. I've worked in several offices here in Sacramento, but also abroad. I also have worked in several different capacities of culinary diplomacy. I used to implement the State Department's International Visitor Leadership Program. Some of you may have heard of IVLP if you've hosted guests at your house for dinner, or sometimes the Library of Congress also asks folks here in Sacramento to house their visitors while they're doing programming, which we're really lucky. Not a lot of cities across the state have that ability to interact with international folks. I've also taught culinary diplomacy cooking classes to children here in Sacramento, and I've also worked with cross-cultural food programming for the food bank. So where I fit into the whole culinary diplomacy world is I am more of a practitioner. I can try to be an academic and do a lot of research, but to me, it just tires me out. So for me, I'm more about the people-to-people connection, or what we would call citizen diplomacy. I have also traveled and used to live in the space of the former Soviet Union, and I don't mean that to be offensive. It's just I've lived in Estonia, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, Russia. It's just easier to say that whole area than the individual groups or regions. And the UNESCO Heritage Intangible Heritage List is something we'll talk about later, but in that particular region, this list is super important and sometimes causes conflict around food. And finally, what really interests me these days is the geography of regional cuisines and how climate change is affecting these traditional foodways. So let's go over what we'll be talking about today. First off, we'll get a little bit technical, and we'll talk about some international relations theory, or just an umbrella overview. Next, we'll go into what is culinary diplomacy. We'll discuss the 3 branches of culinary diplomacy, and then after that, we'll have a short Q&A break. So if you have any burning questions about, oh my gosh, what does this mean? I'm so confused. Does this apply? Then you'll be able to ask it then. Then we'll talk about some of the challenges in the field. Some of you may be familiar with some of these, especially after this summer. And then I'll also discuss how you can get involved, what resources are out there for you, and if you have any more questions, I can answer them then. So let's get started. The easiest way to win hearts and minds is through the stomach. This is from Paul Rockauer. He's one of my colleagues. And he, I think now, is working for the State Department as well. So he is one of the leading or foremost academics in America on culinary diplomacy. So first, let's talk about international relations. International relations is essentially how different nation states interact with each other through politics, economics, and culture. For international relations, there are different tools. We first have hard power, which is slightly coercive. This is usually something you use at last resort. Usually you use soft power first, then you use hard power. It depends on your philosophy on foreign policy. Right now, I would say this administration, it leans more towards hard power. So some examples of that would be military efforts. This doesn't necessarily mean like going and attacking another country. It could be driving your battleship really close to someone's border as like a way to kind of threaten them, but not do anything, like not harm anyone. It can also mean economic sanctions. So not allowing or putting on heavier taxes on imports from a certain country. And then finally, I would say the worst option is war, most costly and most deadly. Our previous administration, I would say, leaned, well, I don't know. They definitely utilized more soft power, and this is more about persuasion. It's usually something, this kind of soft power in the strategy of diplomacy, you're usually looking out 5 years, if not 10, 15, 20. It's a long end game. So this includes cultural exchanges, and one that you may be familiar with is the Peace Corps. This would be under cultural exchanges, or the International Visitor Leadership Program. This is under cultural exchange. Another example of soft power is economic assistance. So when we send money to other countries to help them when there's been a disaster, or when there's a genocide, or IMF is also another example, although again, contentious depending on what you think about the IMF. And then overall diplomacy. And as we'll talk about today, there are different kinds of diplomacy. We're going to focus or drill down into where culinary diplomacy fits. So, what is culinary diplomacy? I am going to invite you folks to use our chat box. I'm actually going to pop out of this full screen view so I can look at what you guys are typing. And I want to have you guys think about, what do you think culinary diplomacy means? You're seeing the answer, don't look. There you go. What does culinary diplomacy mean to you? So sharing food and attendance stories, interaction through food. Learning about other cultures' foods. Connecting through foods and sharing stories and our regional foodways. Very good, yeah. Connecting with others through food, sharing food with other individuals, sitting around the kitchen table with a stranger, sharing food, breaking bread at the same table. Excellent, yes. These are all definitely part of culinary diplomacy. So I'm going to go ahead and share the presentation again. And so culinary diplomacy to me means utilizing food to enhance cross-cultural communication and influence others. So when you're around the kitchen table, you might start with like, hey, how do you make so-and-so a dish? Or, hey, try my dish. And from there, you can start conversations that might be a little bit deeper, that go below that intercultural iceberg level. Culinary diplomacy kind of came on the academic field or radar in the early 2000s. Originally, there were academics in New Zealand and Australia noticing this trend in Asia, where countries were utilizing food to market their culture and thus boost their economy. Here we have two notable academics, Sam Chappell-Sokol and Paul Rachauer, who wrote multiple papers that are very well known in the field about culinary diplomacy. And here we have the branches of culinary diplomacy. And I'll kind of show you where everyone fits in. So the first branch, I would contend, is gastrodiplomacy. This is kind of where, Sam Chappell-Sokol fits in. He originally was doing an internship at the White House the year that they hosted the Le Club des Chefs, and that's when we started all of our culinary initiatives on the diplomatic end. Then we have culinary branding. This is where Paul comes in. Paul has written a lot about how different nation states have utilized their cuisines and products to market around the world, as well as build their agricultural economies. And then the third branch of culinary diplomacy is where you'll find me, in citizen diplomacy. And I like citizen diplomacy. To me, citizen diplomacy is the most inclusive. Anyone can practice citizen diplomacy, and that's why I focus and promote this kind of culinary diplomacy. So let's go through and talk about which branches are which. Essentially, the difference between all of them are the types of actors involved in each branch. So let's start with gastrodiplomacy. Seaweed. If you think about Japanese food, you might think of seaweed. If you think about Mexican food, you might think of tortillas. And maybe you just love French cheese. Tons of different kinds of French cheeses. These are the basis of gastrodiplomacy. It's essentially about what products do you associate with your national or regional cuisine. Gastrodiplomacy is perhaps, and I suppose most notably, the most formal form of culinary diplomacy. It's government actor to government actor. And the biggest example of this is state dinners. Here off to the left, you'll see Jimmy Carter with Margaret Thatcher from 1979 at a state dinner. And of course, the US isn't the only country that hosts state dinners. Every country hosts these state dinners when a foreign dignitary comes to visit. So again, I'm going to call on you guys and utilize that noodle up in your head and tell me, what are some typical Irish ingredients that come to mind? So I'm going to do this gracefully this time. Stop sharing, if I can find it. And then I'll take a look at what you guys write. Potatoes. Guinness. Yes, oh my goodness. I love Guinness. Different. Corned beef. Salmon, soda bread, poutine. Soda bread. Yes, I do make soda bread every St. Patty's Day. Mutton. Haggis. Potatoes, soda bread. So there seems to be a general consensus around potatoes, salmon, some lamb. Well, let's take a look at what the President of Ireland decided to serve the Queen of England when she visited. So let's take a look. So this is the menu. And as you can see, there are some typical dishes that we may expect. We have some salmon. Do we have potato? We have some cabbage. And we have some soda bread. And when you are served this menu, just like any fancy restaurant, you would get the menu on one side, and on the other side, you would get where everything is from. And so if you want to take a look, here are the 11 different counties that the produce is from. And you may be like, oh, Kelsey, what does 11 counties actually mean? Well, here's a map. Ireland's pretty small. There's not that many counties. And if you take a look, it's quite a bit of the country is featured here. And so state dinners can be a great way to showcase your products for potential trade. That's what it was traditionally used for, is to increase agricultural or culinary trade. If the president of one country likes one of your produce, maybe he'll ship it in. Maybe he'll give you a discount on the taxes when he imports it, or she imports it. And I think one of the things to point out here too is you can also feature some things that people may not think of, like watercress and spring onions. There's a huge culture in Ireland of foraging, both in the spring and sea and coastal foraging. So they actually are also known for seaweed as well, especially these days. All right, let's move to the second branch, culinary branding. So this is the one that Paul really likes. It's government to people. So essentially state actors are interacting with citizens from their region or other regions. These are usually marketing campaigns. So for example, you have exchanges. So for us, that would be like chef exchanges. We send our chefs abroad to other countries. Product promotion, we'll get to that in a second. And then conferences. So here on the left, you're actually seeing the booth for America at the 2015 Milan Expo. And that expo was, the theme was, I think it was like food for the people, energy for the masses or something. It was all food related. And there were over 145 countries that had booths at this conference. So unfortunately, it's not happening. It happened in 2015, but wow, can you imagine going to 145 booths, experiencing 145 countries' dishes? Oh my gosh, I think I would like have a Monty Python experience there and just blow up. All right, so let's move to the next one. So here are some examples of other countries and what they've done. This first picture is a picture of Thailand's program. I think it was Thai World Kitchen. It was started in 2002, and their mission was to increase Thai restaurants around the world. And essentially, they sent restaurateurs, Thai restaurateurs, to different parts of the world to learn about the cultures, see if they could open a restaurant, and come back and report. And if they gave like a big enough report, if they found enough information, did a nice market assessment, saw that they could open a restaurant, they would get the seed money to open the restaurant in that country. And it's pretty impressive. The original goal was to increase the number of restaurants from, I think at the time it was 5,000 to 8,000 by 2010. By 2011, they had overshot their goal and had over 10,000 restaurants around the world. And so you might think, oh, great, they have Thai restaurants, woohoo, go them, gold star. But actually, this goes back to building revenue for Thailand. Essentially, one, they're creating new markets around the world for Thai-specific agricultural products that other countries may not have to utilize in these new restaurants. And two, one of the ways that you can utilize culinary branding is to increase and pique people's interest. Oh, I like this Thai food. Maybe I want to spend my next vacation in Thailand because I love this food. I could eat it all week. So they have also seen an increase in tourism based off of this program. After seeing the success of the Thai program, South Korea also launched a program featuring Korean cuisine. They even created a university for kimchi. Their program was a little bit different. It focused on traditional foods like kimchi. You may have heard of all the probiotics kimchi has. It's probably good for you to protect you from coronavirus. That's what I've recently heard. But these are all the ways that they're promoting a traditional food that then people are eager to learn about. They created global cooking classes around the world where they would have a pop-up truck. You get to learn how to make kimchi, and then it would drive to the next city. And it would just go from country to country, teaching people more about kimchi and other traditional Korean products. For us in the United States, we went a little bit of a different route. We created the Diplomatic Culinary Partnership Program in 2012, which I described a little bit before. It's essentially our chefs in America who are sent to embassies around the world to then do cultural programming. So I have a friend who works at an embassy and at the time worked in Morocco, and he did a whole week of Midwestern cooking. So the first half of the week was he invited the chefs from the Midwest to come over, showcase their cooking, and then the second half of the week, the chefs then staged or kind of interned under the Moroccan chefs, and they had a cook-off showdown. So each team, the American and the Moroccan chef, competed against another team of a Moroccan and American chef. So it just creates conversation around different cultures and different parties that may not have otherwise come together. Famous chefs that you may know of, especially now in the news, Jose Andres is one of these chefs. Bill Yassis, he was the White House chef for Barack Obama. Ming Tsai, who's based in Boston, he's also on public television. Rick Bayless, another public television alum. All of them are part of this diplomatic culinary partnership. And finally, this one is not at the nation state level, but it's at the UN level. This is a picture of lavash. And it may not seem that controversial in the picture. However, due to UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage List, Intangible List, it has created quite some controversy. Essentially, this list designates the origin of practices. So this can be songs, it can be art practices, it can be dancing, but it can also be foodways, food practices. And the list is created to both promote the foodways and food practices and also protect it. So once it has gone through the process to be on the list, it is then deemed as this food came from this country. And for lavash, it was allocated to Armenia, but for some of you travelers of that region, you may know you'll also find lavash in Azerbaijan and Turkey. And that area of the world has had political differences for a very long time. And so having lavash allocated to Armenia was quite controversial. This utilization of a single product can also be found in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine, and a couple of other Middle Eastern countries fighting over who originated hummus. And in the media, that led to the hummus wars of 2012. So when I think of New Orleans, I think of beignets. And I love traveling via food. So this is a Wisconsin map of cheese. I would probably go visit all the cheese. I'm working on the cheese map of Sonoma right now. And my home state of North Carolina even has a barbecue map. Yes, I'm also working on that. So regions also can utilize culinary branding. For instance, for those who are local to Sacramento, you may have heard that we are America's farm to fork capital. I don't know if you knew that, but that is what we've decided to be. And so we have an annual event, a huge food event every September where we celebrate being the farm to fork capital, and we have tons of promotions of our farmers markets. This is kind of how our region has decided to brand itself to other regions of the United States as the farm to fork capital. So again, let's put on our thinking caps. And I know a lot of you are from Sacramento, but I wanted to see, how do you think your city engages in culinary diplomacy? So we have food maps as an example. We have festivals. What are some other ways that you see perhaps Sacramento promoting itself as the farm to fork capital? I think we have people from Iowa or Idaho. That's like corn and potatoes. I know there's a corn museum in Iowa. I visited it. So I'm going to stop sharing and oopsies. Go on over to the chat to see what you guys are saying. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of questions. I'm sorry. I can't see the chat while I'm talking or sharing the screen.
I was writing those questions down for you, Kelsey, so
thank you.
When you're ready, we can proceed.
Okay, I'll get back to them in just a little bit. We have just a few more slides. Oh, Ottawa with beaver tails. That's interesting. How are the beaver tails, Mary Jane? Maple syrup, Florida with OJ. Yes, when I lived in North Carolina, we always saw commercials of happy cows in California. Georgia peaches, pecans, peanuts. Festivals, fairs. The paracord. Dinner on the bridge, I know. It is very difficult to get into. Yep, barbecue. I've done a barbecue tour of Texas. That is so much fun. Food festivals, rice and wine, lots of organic options. Quinoa. That's an original product from South America. Sweet corn from western Colorado, Napa wine. That's a great example, wine country. especially when I have friends visit here, they think, let's go to wine country. Little do they realize there's like tons of wineries right up the foothills. We don't even have to travel that far. Iowa's corn, soybeans, hogs, cattle. Wine maps of El Dorado, yes. Mandarins, garlic, and Gilroy. To me, that was just crazy when I first moved out here. A whole city dedicated to garlic, but it really does smell like garlic. Sake and soy from Folsom, yes, that is a fun tour. So let's hop back in. These are all great examples of how your regions are utilizing the products that are originating from there to gain interest both in tourism, but also to kind of make a name for itself, as in, even if I don't want to visit this town, I think, oh, I need oranges from Florida, oranges from California, that doesn't make sense. Kind of like that. So let's go back to the presentation. Alrighty, so the last branch of culinary diplomacy is, again, kind of where I live. It's citizen diplomacy. Oopsies, I apologize. Undo. I'm sorry, folks. I have a difficult time with this. All right, let's try this. It's people to people, and this includes a lot of things. And you may engage with these on a daily basis. So this includes restaurants, pop-ups, cookbooks, TV shows, food tours, educational courses, and by that I mean like at universities, and then classes, which I mean like the one-offs that you might have at the co-op, or while you're traveling and you go to a cooking school abroad, or you stage with a chef for a day. That's kind of what I mean there. An example of this is the Conflict Kitchen in Pittsburgh. This is such a cool idea. I think it was from the University of Pittsburgh. That's kind of where it got the seed money. But essentially every quarter it would feature the cuisine of a country that the US was currently in conflict with. And so here you can see there's Iranian, Cuban, Venezuelan, Afghan, and every time that you would buy a product, you would actually get a story of someone from that country, and someone who helped develop the menu. I'm not sure if it's still around. When I did a cross-country trip in 2016, it still was there, but especially with COVID, I'm not sure. If it is though, you guys should definitely visit it. I think the last time I heard it was indigenous food. So different types of Native American cuisine. So some examples of this would also include Mudra Joffrey, so famous TV show hosts who are sharing their cuisine with the public, either the American or English, whoever. Food tours, which here in Sacramento, we do have the local roots food tours, where you can kind of learn more about what's both local to Sacramento and then some of the cuisines and history that's here. And then I put up League of Kitchens. I think this is really cool. This is a company and nonprofit based in New York City. They also are starting up in LA, but right now, because we are in quarantine, they have online options. If there's any Stephen Colbert fans too, you may have seen this featured several years ago. The owner, Lisa Gross, was on there, as well as one of the teachers. In the League of Kitchens, Lisa has hired grandmoms that she found around New York City, and they invite people into their kitchens every afternoon to teach them how to cook traditional food ways. And again, I do believe now that we're in quarantine, if you're interested, you could take a class online, which is cool because here in Sacramento, we don't have that option. So right now, I am going to take questions. And Chris, as I'm still sharing my screen, could you maybe read or unmute the people who had the questions?
Let's see. I didn't write down their names, so why don't I just read them out? And
Sure.
if someone recognizes their question and wants to elaborate, you can unmute yourself and do that. I just want to point out the first comment was excellent use of the chat. Thank you for doing it this way. And I want to compliment you as well. I've done a lot of Zoom meetings and haven't used the chat for this kind of interaction. I think that was very clever and works really well.
Yeah.
And as someone else pointed out, making sure that you read them out so that people who happen to be on a phone and couldn't read them for some reason or another were able to hear or see what those things were. So there was a question, and I think there's actually two questions kind of close. Do you know what food they had at that American booth in the expo? And I think
I don't know what they had in the American booth. I do believe that the head chef from the White House was part of the team, though.
Someone says, another person, so what did the Western chefs cook? Hope there was corn on the cob smothered in butter, exclamation mark.
I think they did quite a few things.
So another one, Kelsey, how did the rise of the California wine industry play into diplomacy with France, as France was the leader in fine wine?
I can't say that I am an expert on this topic. I actually think that would be a fascinating paper. I haven't considered it.
This is Sandy, and
Hi,
I
Sandy.
asked that question. Many of you know about that movie called Bottle Shock.
Yep,
so
exactly.
I would be curious, because that is a diplomacy issue between the two countries, and here there's this competition between who's the king of wines, and I was just curious if it's sort of like a standoff given time has passed where, you know, we agree that we can co-share this title. I mean, but I could imagine during that time period, if from a country-to-country diplomacy issue, there could have been tensions. That's kind of where my head was going, you know, even though it happened many years ago.
Oh, totally. I could totally imagine that. I can't say that I know how it was, but I think if you guys know of a college student who wants to do a paper, that would be a great paper to do the history on that and see how it did affect it, because that would essentially change a huge market and revenue stream for France as a whole.
Kelsey, I have a question. Michael Pollan has produced a series of episodes on Netflix. I think it's called Rotten, R-O-T-T-E-N. And there was one section on avocados. The promotion of avocados in California has really worsened the security in Mexico because the cartels have switched from protecting and selling drugs. Of course they're doing that, but there's so many avocados being bought by California. It is such a high-end industry now that the cartels are trying to control the avocado industry coming to California. And that is like the opposite of what you're talking about. It's not diplomacy, it's actual sort of violent cartel action against farmers growing avocados trying to serve the American diet for guacamole.
Wow.
And that can definitely happen. Although I say culinary diplomacy, there is the flip side where it's conflict cuisine.
Yes.
Where
yes.
Some cuisines create conflict, and you can see that, I suppose, in this avocado example, but also how in some American companies have taken over Brazil in the past to feed our desire of certain bananas.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, even it's like the other side of the coin. Culinary diplomacy on one side, conflict cuisine on the other side. Mm-hmm.
Let me switch a little bit. There was you were talking about, I think it was lavash, and during that conversation, someone typed that Israel has also outlawed za'atar in Palestine, so they have more than a hummus argument. It says Israel has also outlawed. To clarify, za'atar was a wild herb that became illegal to forage, becoming a symbol of being almost anti-Arab.
Interesting.
I don't know who wrote that, but if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, so it's Mary Ellen. And it was a law that was passed, so it was considered a wild herb, and it was grown on the place where Palestinians live. And so they saw it as, it's one of the, it's the herb that makes their food and foodways really distinct. And so by putting $1,000 fines for foraging, there became an almost underground for being able to do it. And it's created a lot of political unrest between Israel and, and Palestine. So I was saying it's like the opposite of culinary diplomacy. When you take something that is so intertwined in the identity of a people, and then to say, no, you can't do that. So that's why I wanted to.
There was a question about World's Fairs, and were World's Fairs a vehicle for culinary branding years ago, question mark. Not even sure if we still have them. Someone else writes, World Fairs were even a way of introducing regional foods, tamales in 1893, Chicago World's Fair, hot dogs, St. Louis World's Fair. Want to address that?
I do know there is a World's Fair or another expo coming up. It's supposed to be in 2021 in the UAE. And I do know that the State Department, one of the subsidiaries, like the nonprofit that I used to work with, they are in charge of the booth, and they are considering culinary diplomacy as their theme. So,
and that segues into another question from the same person. When was the first use of the term culinary diplomacy?
Right. So it's kind of in 2002, when the New Zealanders and Australians started talking about this, it was gastrodiplomacy. When it moved over to America, they started trying to differentiate gastrodiplomacy and culinary diplomacy. Culinary diplomacy at the time was used more to talk about what I deem as gastrodiplomacy, and gastrodiplomacy was used to talk about culinary branding. But when you start making an umbrella, and this is one of the difficulties of a burgeoning academic field that's interdisciplinary in nature, you have to start trying to look at it from multiple levels and figure out what are people talking about, what are the common codes that they're using, and how can we start organizing it so that future students and scholars can be all using the same jargon.
Right. There was one other question. It says, off topic, who is branding quinoa? Anybody?
I don't know. I think it would be maybe someone in South America. I know Peru does potatoes. That's like a huge campaign for them.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Peru also does quinoa. They have 17 different varieties.
Did you said Peru, Mary Jane?
Yes.
Peru is also branding quinoa. Okay, 17 varieties.
We need to take a trip to Peru.
What is it?
About 50 different potato varieties.
Am I remembering something right about kiwis too? Was it Australia or New Zealand that they had a different name or something? They changed the name of the fruit. Does anybody know about that?
Yes, I had just read that, Chris, that it was a different name and it was a very unpleasant name.
Yes, exactly.
It was like, you know, gastobellies or something really strange.
Yeah.
And so the marketer said, Americans are not going to like this. Let's say it's from New Zealand. Everyone knows New Zealand is Kiwi. We'll call it that. Yeah, that's a part of that branding, making it acceptable to a new culture.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, I think, oh wait, there is how does DOC or regional designation fit into this theme?
So DOC is used in Europe as a oh, Mary Ellen, do you know? I think it's in French. But it's essentially what the European Union uses.
That's why I wrote DOC, because I can't remember. It's a designated origin of something or other in English, but yes.
And so this fits into more of the national branding or culinary branding for a region, because especially in Europe, only certain things, as many of you probably know, champagne grown out of the Champagne region is called champagne, but elsewhere it's called like Lambrusco, bubbly wine. And so, yeah, it's just another way to market it and protect the agricultural producers, at least in the DOC sense of it.
Makes sense. I think that's all the questions for now.
Okay, let's go back. So now we're going to talk about some of the challenges in the field. I have to admit, this is not my strong suit. I used to be on a podcast and my co-host was more of the person who could really speak to this. But there are some difficulties in the field, and some of you have named it. Of course, conflict cuisine is one of them. Cultural appropriation is another. And so an example of this, many of you may have heard of the friends in Portland who opened a burrito shack, and then they had to shut it down because they had really bad PR. Essentially, they said, you know, we tried to get the recipe while we were in Mexico, no one would talk to us. So we started looking at everybody's houses and kitchens to see what we could find out. Then we tested the recipe. And from there, essentially, people were saying, oh, you stole the recipe for economic gain. And a lot of this all comes back to economic gain. Who is benefiting from the food economically and financially? The next is colonial history. This is, again, considering who has financially benefited from the sharing of certain dishes. A great resource for this is Krishnendu Ray's Ethnic Restaurateur. Amazing book. It is very academic. It's not a fun book that you just read. But he talks about how Italian restaurants have become accepted, but accepted at high prices, like a haute de cuisine, versus why aren't we paying expensive prices for Mexican food? Or why is there a price difference in Japanese food and Chinese food? Which I think are really interesting conversations. And he is actually one of the head professors at the NYU Food Studies program. So he's a great resource to always pull upon from. Next is authenticity and immigration. So there is this conversation about, well, what's authentic? If you add a rice vinegar to an Italian dish instead of a balsamic vinegar, is it really then Italian, or do we call it fusion? A good example of this is what's happened to Chinese food with such diversity in the country to now Chinese American food, where some of it, that's not even a Chinese dish. And then finally is ownership and origins. This goes back to the conflict cuisine and arguments of who owns what product or dish. that will always be there, I think. Oopsies. So actually, can you pop up the poll, Chris? And we'll see what people are already doing in their everyday lives. So mark what you already do. And if you can only choose one, choose the one that you engage with the most.
I set it up as multiple choice for Kelsey.
Great, so
in
they
case
can
you
have
wanted,
multiple
yeah,
answers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
So we've got about 40% of the people. No, jumping up, 53, 60%. I'll give you a hint. They attend the events that expose you to different cultures is winning. Still about 63%. We'll give it a few more seconds here. Try and get a higher percentage of people to vote. You can just click on any numbers that you want, and then that will record it. 70%. Okay, well, that's about a minute. Let's end the poll now. We're at about 73%. Got a few snuck in under the wire. 73% attend events that expose you to different cultures.
Very cool. So these are essentially 4 ways that you yourself can start engaging in culinary diplomacy in your areas. So let's take a look. And these are written for Sacramento specific a little bit. Oops. Hold on. The computer wants to go through this again. Hold on. I'll pop to the next one. Let's see. There we go. All right. So the first one is engaging in culinary tours or tourism in your area. I think going and attending different restaurants, different festivals, perhaps going to restaurants of immigrants that are in your neighborhood or around your neighborhood, or even going to grocers and asking them how to use specific products could really help and open and broaden your repertoire of cooking and knowledge of a culture. Another one is read or cook through cookbooks of people, of cultures that you're not currently an expert at. I know that we're so lucky here in Sacramento that we have this Mediterranean climate that really goes well with not only Mediterranean cuisine, but also Latin American cuisine, Southeast Asian cuisine, and I would even say like Indian cuisine as well. We just have such a plethora of different products available for us. You can also attend events around, and one of the ones that did show up a lot before coronavirus was the pop-ups in East Bay, for the slow food chapter there. They had been working with different immigrant populations through the IRC, which is the International Rescue Committee, and hosting pop-ups so that these immigrants could get some notoriety based around their cuisine and potentially have more clients for catering. And finally, you can always host dinners showcasing the local products for visitors in your community. And again, I think you guys at Friendship Force already do that. But again, there's also other opportunities here in our community through either exchange students or the International Visitor Leadership Program. So, some other resources you might have. And there's a picture from the South Bay or East Bay. So here are some resources. We have here, some books, some podcasts, and a TV show. So first off, Gustavo Aran, I can't speak Spanish, sorry. Ariano. Thank you. I was a French-Russian speaker, so still learning how to pronounce Spanish. But his Taco USA book is actually used in a lot of university food studies courses. And it's an easy read. He's a food writer for the LA Times, and he's amazing. I would highly recommend this book. The two podcasts, of course, it would be remiss of me not to mention The Culinary Citizen, which is a podcast I co-founded maybe 5 years ago. I did leave the podcast / sell it to my co-host. So I don't know what she's been doing in the past 2 years, but at least you would have a library of 3 or 4 seasons of different interviews of all kinds of practitioners in the culinary diplomacy field. If you're interested in some of the challenges around culinary diplomacy, take a look at Racist Sandwich. They're a really notable and commendable podcast. And if you're someone who just wants to sit back and watch TV, Taste the Nation with Padma Lakshmi is amazing. I watched it several weeks ago, and some of the episodes blew my mind. Really great, I would say, food journalism. And she talks about a lot about issues that immigrants in the United States are currently facing. And finally, if you're interested in more of like the academic side of things, maybe just a general overview of the field, the University of Southern California has a public diplomacy program. And within that program, they house culinary diplomacy. It's the school that Paul Rockower came out of, and he had a lot of support when he was a student to build out the field. And so a lot of his writings, a lot of the support of his professors' writings are in there, and they have several issues of their quarterly journal focused on culinary diplomacy. So if you need some reading on road trips or just in your backyard, take a look there. All right, so I am going to open this up to questions one more time. Thank you so much for attending, and I will be popping out, stopping the screen share just so I can help keep abreast of any new questions.
So we have some comments. Actually, there was one kind of a question: have we appropriated tapas? It can mean almost anything now and not from the country of origin. I think Mary Ellen said that.
So controversial, Mary Ellen.
And Mary Ellen, I think, also commented that the international visitor program that Kelsey used to run is planning a once a quarterly cooking class for hosts / visitors to continue the conversation by sharing their recipes and then cooking together. So you want to, Kelsey, is that true?
I think so. I think Mary Ellen might be the lead on that one. I haven't heard anything about it.
So it's something that's going to be coming up, and I know that the International Visitors Program here is really hoping to, I've mentioned a partnership between Friendship Force because it makes just a natural connection. And one of the things was, how do you, when you can't have visitors to your home anymore, how can you continue that conversation? So the idea was to set up all the people who have been international visitors in the past. Kelsey, how many do you think that could mean?
We used to do 400 in a year. That
400 a year.
400 to 500 a year.
Right, so this would be a San Francisco, Sacramento co-production.
So maybe over 1,000 a year.
Maybe 1,000. So that obviously you can't do that many. So they're hoping to get more hosts where they can connect with visitors, even if it wasn't their original person, and share a meal together by sharing recipes and cooking together. So I wanted to just bring that up because I thought it was a great potential for Friendship Force.
That's great, Mary Ellen. Keep us informed as you learn more about that. Yeah, that's right up our alley. Speaking up our alley, Lynn Van Horn says that after our Friendship Force trip to Japan in 2019, I hosted for friends 2 meals which highlighted Japan culture and food. I don't know, Lynn, if you want to follow up on that or. Nope, sure. You'd have to unmute yourself if you know how, Lynn. It's, let me click on this.
Okay, I guess
There
I'm
you go.
unmuted now.
Yep.
Yeah, it was really interesting because Japan was so different from what I really kind of expected. It was so unique, and so the meal stressed things that, like the fact that sometimes my two hosts just put a box of Kleenex on the table for napkins.
Yeah.
So just little things like that were just so unique. And then the fact that they would just put the beer cans on the table, and then they'd put these tiny little glasses, 4-ounce glasses for the beer. And I wanted, and then I also told them they had to bring slippers because there were absolutely no shoes in the house. And it was just interesting to do these little things. Two of the people couldn't use the chopsticks, of course, but still, it was. And I really tried to be authentic with the food, because Japanese food was very different, I thought, from what we have in the United States for Japanese food.
Yeah, I think that's probably true with a lot. I know Taco Bell is not Mexican, so.
Right.
PJ, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself. Let me see if I can ask you to do that. Do you want to ask your question, PJ, or do you want me to do it for
It's
you?
not a question. I just wanted to bring up a company or whatever, that an international company called Eat With.
That's Eat With, EATWITH.
And we have it in Cisco too, but and we got you go online and you can see all the different places that host dinners, and they're in their homes, and they live in towns. And Ray and I stopped in Amsterdam before we went on the Belgian trip, the Friendship Force Exchange, and we went and had dinner with an Amsterdam. They make dinner for probably 6 people. So there were a few other people at the table.
Well, that sounds excellent. I would love to do that. That's
and they do their dinner, that has to do with their cuisine. Yeah, it was fun. And it wasn't very expensive. I mean, what, probably less than a restaurant, so.
Well, it's worth more than a restaurant when you have those experiences. All of us Friendship Force people know that. Kathy, you had a question?
I didn't really have a question, Chris. I just wanted to share with Kelsey and our guests that are on today. Sacramento Friendship Force has done a number of things because we love, of course, cross-cultural experiences. We eat at restaurants at ethnic restaurants when we have a general meeting, after our meeting. We've also had outings to, we've gone to the Sake Brewery in Folsom. We had a tour. We've gone to a craft brewery out by the old Arco Arena. Lots of different winery things. And then let's see, there was something else. We've also, this is before I was a member, they had a kind of like a scavenger hunt at KP International, which is an ethnic, lots and lots of different groups. It's not just Asian food. It's got Hispanic, Russian, or just all kinds of wonderful, wonderful things. And so they had a scavenger hunt out at KP International, and that was before KP International doubled the size of their store. So they are now twice as big. But just a heads up to any locals, if you want to do any shopping at KP International, not only masks are required, but gloves are required.
Wow.
Oh, that's interesting.
Good to know.
Yeah, that's a great store, though. You don't recognize, you can't read some of the labels on the cans, that's for sure. But yeah, Mary Ellen had one more question for Kelsey. If we really wanted to provide a foodstuff or meal that represented this region, what would you serve?
That would represent Sacramento.
Yeah, this region, she says.
That's an interesting one.
That's hard.
I would probably, interestingly, what's coming to mind is maybe like an etouffee with crawfish. I know it's a little crazy, but you have the tomatoes, the rice,
crawfish.
You have the crawfish from the river.
Oh.
It's all local ingredients. And then
good.
probably some like white wine or rosé, because I'm not going to pair that with a heavy red.
I like the way you think.
Good answer, Kelsey. That was a good answer.
Yeah, Marty says tomatoes. Yeah, we used to be called Sacramento. Yeah, it's so many tomatoes when I grew up.
So there's only one problem. Sacramento County didn't really grow them. They only processed them.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Of the list of the 20 top commodities in fruits and vegetables, all that, tomatoes was always number 20.
Yeah, I do remember Natomas, though, those miles of tomatoes out there. And of course, driving on the freeways before they limited the size, every corner in the freeway, the tomatoes would have rolled off the truck and smashed along the side of the freeway.
True.
Remember that? Yeah.
True.
I just saw a watermelon like that the other day, too. PJ did a great local meal for Izmir, Marty said. Oh, and almonds, Sandra Carter mentions, of course, almonds. Yeah, you can add that to your side dish there for your meal.
Add it in.
Yeah, add it in.
Almonds.
Yeah.
Texture.
I think that's all the comments and questions. I do want to make sure everybody understands we're going to have a little bit of a Friendship Force meeting after this, just to give an update on what's going on, whether you're a member or not. Feel free to stay on after Kelsey says her formal goodbye. I do want to thank Kelsey for everything you've done. And I'm going to actually, I don't know if I can't unmute you people because it doesn't allow me to do that anymore. It's a security issue to keep me from unmuting you when you were saying something bad about me. but if you want to unmute yourself and thank Kelsey, feel free to do that or do it in the chat.
Yes.
Thank you
This
so
was
much
very
for a great
interesting.
presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really, really rewarding. And of course, you're
Loved it.
preaching to the choir here in Friendship Force, and we've done a lot of work with the Open World and the Library of Congress programs, and then we've also done a lot of dinner hostings for the World Trade Organization here in Sacramento. And so, yeah, you were preaching to the choir, but we loved what you said. And I had no idea about the whole cultural diplomacy even existed. So very interesting.
Can we get your contact information, Kelsey? Can you put that in the chat?
Sure, I can definitely do this.
Great.
Yeah. So I'll send you guys my email address.
Perfect.
Mary Ellen, I think we need Kelsey to do a presentation for Renaissance.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great idea.
She is, but it's a community program. She's doing it, if I'm right, in the evening, so that we're all going to have an opportunity to hear her. And we meant it always as a Friendship Force Renaissance group thing. So it's the Cooking of Georgia.
Okay.
Oh, nice. So make sure we get that on our schedule.
The date right now, but after hearing this, I'm sorry, Kelsey, you might have to repeat this one for Renaissance.
It's okay.
Mary Ellen, did you say that one, the one Cooking for Georgia, is open to the public, non-members?
Yes, that one is purposely, I knew that Kelsey was going to attract a broad audience, so that one is open to the community.
Okay, because we'll advertise it too.
Right,
Yeah.
there are at least 19 programs now that are open to everyone, and I'm hoping through our pop-ups with Kathy's help that we're going to be able to expand that.
Excellent. Excellent.
Kathy's also one of our speakers, by the way.
Ooh. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for having me today. And if you have any questions, comments, of course, feel free to reach out, and I'll respond to your emails as quickly as I can.
Thank you, Sacramento. Nice job.
I'm gonna
Okay.
pop off and be Russian lessons.
All right. See you all. Great to see faces from other parts of the country and other countries from
Bye.
Canada. That was great.